A very good afternoon and welcome to the Saturday edition of the Tropical Outlook. Yes, we have reached another weekend and it is the first of meteorological summer. Thanks for clicking on and I hope everybody is enjoying their weekend so far. Before we continue with the video, be sure to hit that like button, share with your friends and family and subscribe to the channel. I do greatly appreciate everybody's support. And so obviously taking a little bit of a different look through the course of the weekend tends to be casting our eyes a little bit away from the UK, Ireland and European pattern and looking at the global picture. And I suppose the weekends, Saturday is going to have a little bit of a tropical outlook kind of slant to it. I'm trying to kind of work on a few things here, taking a little bit of a break from weather talk at the moment. I'm waiting on a few people getting back to me with regards to interviews, so there's not going to be a continuation of the weather talk series just at this moment in time. So there's a little bit of a break with that, but I'm probably going to pick Saturdays to discuss the latest with regards to La Niña and the prospects going forward. Also talking about the Magellan Oscillation, where its position within the equatorial region and how that's affecting the weather, but also looking at the tropics, where obviously this is the first official day of the Atlantic hurricane season of 2024, and I thought it would be quite appropriate to look at the current situation, talking about the forecast a little bit, what we expect to see taking place as we go through the course of the hurricane season. We are obviously expecting quite a significant active season with the development of the La Nina, with the warm temperatures within the Atlantic basin, and how that implicates on our weather as well, because a major part of the summer forecast does implement and take into consideration the tropics, because obviously tropical activity, the purpose of tropical systems in the first place is nature's way of taking heat away from the tropics and redistributing it towards the polar region. So obviously as you take heat out of the tropics and lift it northwards, that has a significant impact, downstream impact on the jet stream and the ridge trough pattern within the mid latitudes. And I think as we go, especially more into the month of August, that is likely to have a significant influence on the weather pattern here in Western Europe. So it's looking all about the big picture and how the big picture affects the smaller details, so to speak. So obviously, it's been a busy past week or so here at Vogan Weather HQ. There has been a few minor tweaks. I'm not going to hide away from the fact that there has been a few minor adjustments made between last Sunday and the release of the forecast and the live stream to this weekend. And obviously, it's better to make minor adjustments before we actually enter either the summer season or a particular month than adjusting it during the course of the month. So there's no shying away from the fact that I have slightly altered the June outlook. And when I released the June forecast yesterday, I've actually went for a slightly average to drier than average month for the UK and Ireland and Western Europe, but also a slightly average to below average temperature wise. So there is a slight change from what was said back last week. So I just want to kind of put it out there without shying away from anything. It's all about being honest. No hype, no bias. I try my best to deliver accurate information here on the channel. So obviously the June outlook is freely available, and also the summer forecast is freely available on marfoganweather.com. There is links in the description below today's video. Also tomorrow, 94th edition of the Global Weather Report, we're going to have a look at all things global and see where the heat is, areas of cold, believe it or not, and dry areas versus wet areas. There has been some outstanding heat across parts of Pakistan, northern India in recent times. Severe drought across Central America. We'll see how that's evolving. We had quite a detailed look at that last week in the Global Weather Report on Sunday, Saturday, in fact, last week. So you can check that out if you hadn't seen that and you're interested. Obviously, no live stream this weekend. I happen to be a little bit busy tomorrow, so there is actually going to be a global weather report, but it'll be an uploaded video, so you can check that out at your leisure as well. And all being well, next Sunday there will be business as usual here with the live stream. That's next weekend. So anyway, let's get right into it. How are we looking with regards to the latest situation with La Nina? So we'll have a look and see Nina region 1.2, 3.4, where we're going in terms of the temperature anomaly. Remember, to reach La Nina category, you have to have a temperature in Nino region 3.4 of 0.5 below average. And this is the current temperature anomaly globally. But you notice here, there's your La Nina footprint continuing to show its hand. Deep waters below the surface, very cold waters now starting to rise to the surface. So we're continuing to see these waters cool within this region of the equatorial Pacific. Now, the implications this may have on the atmosphere is you will expect to see higher pressure building over this colder than average waters. And if you've been following for some time, La Ninas tend to favor more active tropical Atlantic hurricane seasons. Now, it's one thing to have La Nina, but it also has to come into play with the Atlantic. And the reason why we're expecting such a busy season this year is the combination of La Nina, which tends to favor more enhanced upward motion, but also less wind shear. Strong westerly winds in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere tend to blow across the Atlantic. When you've got El Nino, you have stronger winds blowing over the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and the tropical Atlantic. That tends to suppress hurricane activity within the Atlantic basin. It ramps it up over the Pacific. It tends to suppress it over the Atlantic. When you've got La Nina, you tend to have stronger high pressure over the central and eastern equatorial Pacific and lower pressure and reduced westerly winds within the upper levels of the atmosphere. So you've got strong winds blowing across the top from west to east, and then at the low levels you've got the easterly trade winds as normal. So you tend to have more favourable conditions within the atmosphere with La Nina. But the concerning aspect this year is the strong warmth within the equatorial Atlantic. That tends to have an even greater favourability for tropical cyclone activity within the Atlantic basin. So this is the crux of why we think this is going to be a big season. The combination of a cold Enzo in the Pacific and a very warm tropical Atlantic. But other aspects still need to come into play in order for it all to come together just nicely. So the all-important Niña region 3.4, this is the temperature anomalies as we are going forward. So you notice here that back in March we were in El Nino category, albeit weak, just over a degree above average. Then we started to see this kind of nosedive from the end of week 1 of April through till May. We're now entering below normal temperatures within Niña region 3.4. And that is important. We're likely to continue to see this drop. It's once this temperature drops below a half a degree below average, that is when you start to talk about La Nina category, La Nina territory in terms of official La Nina. So Nino region 1.2 is looking like this here. This is off tropicaltidbits.com. And you can see here that we went around the 9th, 10th of March over a degree above average. This is the area closest to South America. You see a very sharp drop here within the space of a week or so. And then really we've generally been below normal in terms of temperature at the surface here. A little bit of a recovery in temperature, if you notice here during week 1 of May, and now we've really seen a sharp dropping off as those deep cold waters rise to the surface. It's kind of forcing the surface temperature to drop to lower levels here. So we're going to continue to see Niña region 1.2, which is against the South American coast, and then slightly further west, Niña region 3.4, we are going to continue to see that drop as well. And if you look at the NMME model, which is the North American multi-model run, you can see that La Nina signature continuing to expand and mature. So this is the projection for the month of May. Then June, you can see here the expansion. July continuing to spread westwards here, if you notice. And then as we get into the meat of the hurricane season, August into September, that mature La Nina signature is showing its hand. So you can see here that we are continuing to see this La Nina progress as we go forward here. And look at the Atlantic here, firmly warmer than average. Now, at this moment in time, the sea surface temperatures within the Atlantic basin is reflective of late July. And we're going to talk a little bit about the reason why this time of the year is typically quieter than what you would expect later in the season here. Remember that we still have quite a lot of hostility within the atmosphere during the month of June. We've still got frontal systems that can penetrate deep into the tropical belt. So therefore, your increase in wind shear, your increase in dry air from the North American continent, South America as well. But also what you've got is you tend to have quite a lot of dry air coming off the Sahara during the first half of the season here. So winds coming in, strong winds coming off the Sahara, spreading Saharan dust across the tropical Atlantic. That tends to suppress the amount of water vapor within the atmosphere, and it just generally chokes off systems that are trying to develop. But this is let's have a look and see. That's one thing. So the atmosphere is one thing at this time of the year. It doesn't tend to be quite as favorable, but also sea surface temperature anomalies also don't tend to be overly favorable here. So just bear with me a second here, because I've just came out of something that I wanted to show you here. This is the Atlantic sea surface temperature. So the threshold to sustain and help strengthen tropical cyclones, the threshold is around 27 Celsius or 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And you notice here that the water temperatures, unusually so, are warmer than average across the eastern equatorial portions of the Atlantic. But you notice here that they're quite far south down towards the equator here. This is where water temperatures are conducive. But you notice here up towards Cape Verde, we've got 23 to 24 Celsius. And that generally is below the threshold. So we've got plenty of waves at the moment coming off the African coast. But as these waves come over the relatively below subpar water temperatures for sustaining tropical systems, they tend to struggle once they enter these slightly colder than average waters here, or cooler waters, should I say. At this time of the year, you tend to find that tropical systems develop further west over the Atlantic, and we've got very, very warm waters compared to average for this time of the year. 27, 28 Celsius towards the outer Lesser Antilles or the Greater Antilles here. So this is the mouth of the Caribbean. So you've got the open Atlantic here, then you've got the Antilles Islands here, and then as you get west of these, you're into the Caribbean, and you've got some very, very warm waters here, by the way, 29, 30 Celsius, even 31, 32 Celsius parts up close towards the Florida Peninsula here. Around the Cuban island here as well. You've still got water temperatures conducive here. You typically don't find water temperatures at these levels at this time of the year. It's typically later in July and into August. That's when you tend to find near 30 Celsius within the Gulf of Mexico. But we're ahead of the game because it's been so warm during the winter season and also through the spring season. Water temperatures have been at record levels for the time of the year. So obviously, as we go through the course of June into July, these this area of 27, 28 Celsius is going to expand towards the African coast, and therefore the conditions within the ocean becomes conducive, but also within the atmosphere, they're likely to start becoming more conducive as well. So, in terms of wind shear, we talk a lot about wind shear, and at this moment in time, we do have quite a lot of wind shear. So, these are winds between 200 millibars, which is around the 35 to 40,000 foot level, and also 5,000 feet. So, this is between 200 and 850 millibars here. So, this is basically quite a good depth of mid to upper level atmosphere here. And where you've got the reds, that shows stronger than average winds blowing within the atmosphere here. This is not conducive for tropical cyclone activity here. So you've got quite a lot of strong winds. So this is yesterday and into today, the 1st of June. And we've got obviously quite a lot of wind blowing at this level over the United States, but also across northern Mexico, through the Gulf of Mexico, into the majority of the Caribbean Sea, and right the way through the main development region of the Atlantic Basin. We've got some fairly robust and strong westerly winds here, not conducive for tropical cyclone activity. So we have got waves coming off the African coast. They're moving into quite a sheared environment within the Atlantic, and hence why we're not seeing a great deal of activity. We'll talk a little bit about the Mann-Julian oscillation and how at the moment it's not favourable for tropical cyclone activity within the Atlantic Basin. But as we progress through the month of June, we're likely to see more favourability within the Atlantic Basin in terms of the MJO signal. So as we continue to play through this loop, we've essentially got a very strong ridge of high pressure over Central America. We've been seeing severe drought across Mexico, Belize, Honduras, Nicaragua. A lot of thunderstorm activity, may I add, across Colombia, Venezuela, Suriname. There's been a lot of thunderstorm activity here within the Central American monsoon trough, but it's been generally over the eastern portion of the Caribbean due to the fact that we've had drought and anomalous high pressure over Mexico, the Yucatan, down into Belize. That has been essentially cutting off thunderstorm activity and the heavy rainfall that we've seen in parts of the Eastern Caribbean, Puerto Rico, Haiti, Dominican Republic, even parts of Jamaica. We've been seeing flooding in the eastern side of the Caribbean and severe drought over the heart of Mexico and the Western Caribbean. Now, essentially what we are going to see is eventually the strong westerly winds easing in strength. Now, if we look at how do we see the easing of the westerly winds over the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico? Well, if we look at the SOI, which is the Southern Oscillation Index, this is a measure of atmospheric pressure between Darwin in Australia and Tahiti in the South Pacific. Now, when you've got numbers representing negative, that tends to show a more of an El Nino base state. And when you've got an El Nino base state, you tend to have stronger winds within the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and the Atlantic Basin. When you have positive figures, that tends to reflect more of a La Nina type atmosphere. And what that does is we're going to start to see winds relaxing over the Caribbean, Gulf, and the Atlantic Basin as the La Nina starts to become more influential in the atmosphere above. So this is trying to join up the dots. I hope this is explaining things without it being too complex, but also too much kind of waffle. Trying to explain it as best I possibly can. When you continue to see that cold waters within the equatorial Pacific building, the atmosphere then starts to respond, and the SOI, as the La Nina becomes more influential in the atmosphere, the SOI numbers should start to go into firm positive. Now, you notice here, this is a daily contribution. We've got positive figures, 15.95, 11.59. That's quite reflective of of La Nina. Then we notice here that they start to go lower and lower, and we're actually the latest daily contribution, which is for today, the 1st of June. It's actually minus 10.33, which is more El Nino, and actually the models are showing why that is the case, because we've got these strong westerly winds within the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere coming off the Pacific through Mexico, through the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, and right the way through the tropical Atlantic. This is quite an El Nino type atmosphere at the moment. But as we continue to play through this loop, folks, what you're going to start to see is these winds start to lift further and further north. And as we do progress through the month of June, we are actually going to start to see these winds lifting further north. And what I would expect to see is these SOI numbers continuing to go into the teens above the negative, above the neutral, and therefore the atmosphere should start to respond with the development of the La Nina here. So at this moment in time, we don't have a particularly favourable atmosphere. So if we look at the upper dynamics here at the moment, just bear with me a wee second here. I'm going to try and get the precipitation and moisture to show you here what's going on. So let's get back to the here now, and you can see here that we have got a lack of precipitation. Mexico, down in the Yucatan, Belize, Honduras. We do have some areas of low pressure quite far south, but they're avoiding this area of high pressure over Mexico at the moment. Remember what I said to you, we've got frontal systems at the moment exiting North America. They're coming up against resistance of that ridge. So any moisture is getting drawn out of South America. As these fronts move eastwards, they're pulling moisture out of South America, but it's essentially affecting only the eastern side of the Caribbean because we've got this ridge over Mexico at the moment here. Here's these waves at the moment. Notice they're quite far south. They're avoiding these strong winds coming across the Atlantic from west to east. So any moisture, any waves, any thunderstorm activity at the moment is well to the south, down closer to the equator. Now, as we progress through the month of June, July, into August, into September, this band of moisture here is going to continue to lift further north. That's the international intertropical convergence zone here. And what we are going to see is this robust African wave train, and you'll find this position more up towards the Cape Verde Islands as we go forward here. And as we continue to play through the loop, if we kind of just scan back slightly, and you can see here what we're expecting as we go through the next week or so here. So casting our eyes, you can see here the moisture running underneath the ridge of high pressure over the mid-Atlantic here, suppressing the activity quite far south, and that is quite normal at this time of the year. Notice here a lack of moisture, completely avoiding Yucatan, the heart of Mexico. It's all down across the southern flank of Central America here through the Caribbean, and hopefully as we progress through the month of June, we should start to see more favorable conditions lifting further north, and we should hopefully finally get some moisture into Mexico. Notice here that as we get towards the Thursday of next week, 13 days away, so this is actually a week on Thursday, you've actually starting to see moisture getting into Belize, into the Yucatan, into parts of Mexico here. Why is that the case? Well, if we look at the MJO, we expect to see the MJO rotating into phases 6, 7, possibly into 8. What does that mean? It's that enhanced convection that we're seeing at the moment over the maritime continent, so over Australia, Indonesia, Southeast Asia. That is where we're seeing the pulse of active MJO at the moment, enhancing showers, thunderstorm activity. But that is expected to continue spreading eastwards over the course of the next couple of weeks through the Pacific, and eventually it should end up in the Atlantic. and that is going to help pull moisture out of the lower portions of Central America up into the drought-stricken areas of Belize and Mexico, and that is going to hopefully help generate moisture into this region of the world here. So you can see the moisture seen by the GFS starting to lift further north here. We should start to weaken that mid-Atlantic high, or the Atlantic high, over the Caribbean, over particularly the Western Caribbean and over Mexico. Now, if we look at the NMME model, you can actually see where we start to increase moisture. So this is the month of May, very dry, as you can see, across Belize, Honduras, and Mexico here. Florida, record-breaking heat, drought conditions here. Look at what happens as we go into the month of June. We're starting to see more moisture, and the majority of Mexico is still staying dry, if you notice here. But into the month of June, we are expecting to see the Central American monsoon trough lifting a little bit further north, encompassing more of the Caribbean. Still, like I say, concerning to see dry conditions in the month of June. Then, as we progress into the month of July and into the month of August, we're starting to finally lift moisture into Mexico itself and into the Caribbean. You notice here also that band within the main development region of the Atlantic continues to progress north. This is May, this is June, so you're keeping an eye on that band of moisture within the Atlantic. It's continuing to lift north as we progress out of May, June, into July, and then into August. That intertropical convergence zone is continuing to become more active and further north as these waters in the eastern portions of the Atlantic warm up. We're seeing the atmosphere, we're reducing those westerly winds, and we should start to see a real rise in activity through the Atlantic into the Caribbean, into the Gulf of Mexico, and affecting Central America, Mexico, and the United States. With, unfortunately, we're likely to see some very significant impacts possible. We can't forecast exactly impact, but we're likely to see a very, very busy season. You typically find between 55 and 65 tropical waves that come off Africa on any given year, and obviously it's a different matter with regards to those systems developing or not. Finally, I want to look at the MJO here and show you how that is going to progress likely into the Atlantic Basin as we go through the course of June, and then how that's going to impact the tropical activity here. So I'm just trying to find here, let's get to the right map. Bear with me here, and we will have a look at the 200 CHI anomaly here. So this is showing the current rising and sinking of the air. You can see here all this rising. This is a phase 4-5 MJO signal. We've got a lot of enhanced convection over the Indian Ocean and Australia, Indonesia, up into Southeast Asia. Notice all the sinking air over Central America, the majority of North America, and the Atlantic Basin. So that's showing hostile wind sheared environment over the Atlantic Basin at the moment. Now, watch what happens as we play through this loop. You can see actually that the sinking becomes even more pronounced as we move into the current period. So into the 1st of June, we've got a lot of sinking air over Central America. So basically over South America, Central America, and North America, we've got a lot of strong sinking. We've got the MJO at the moment. All the rising air, all the convection is generally over this region here, stretching from eastern Indian Ocean through the maritime continent and then the Pacific. Now, as we progress through the first couple of weeks of June, you notice that we're starting to see the greens shifting, albeit weakly, into the Americas, into the Atlantic, and into Africa. That is going to show the atmosphere becoming more conducive for tropical cyclone activity within the Atlantic Basin here. So we're seeing the MJO progress eastwards through the course of the next couple of weeks, and all this unfavorable conditions over the Atlantic Basin should start to switch around. So it definitely looks as if we are going to increase cyclogenesis within the Atlantic basin as we move towards the middle and probably the second half of the month. That is when we're likely to see a few named storms within the Atlantic basin and possible impacts. We're also going to see increased moisture in the drought-stricken Central America as well, which will be good news. It's been long-winded. I appreciate that. Let me know in the comments section below. Were you interested in this video? Did you enjoy it? And would you like to see more of these videos? Kind of testing the waters with regards to the tropical content here on the channel as well. I know there's many people more interested in UK, Ireland, and European weather, but it's trying to spread the global influence, if you will. Do check out tomorrow's Global Weather and Climate Report, edition 94. I hope you can watch that, enjoy it. And like, share, and subscribe. You know the drill. I'll see you again tomorrow with more. Bye for now.